Elisha crying. There are so many things in this story that I think you'll find interesting. For instance, why did the Shunammite woman go to the land of the Philistines? Why didn't she just go down to Judah? Well, there could be several reasons, other than the fact that she may have had relatives that lived there, but also Judah might have been going through a famine as well. When you go down to the land of the Philistines, which is down in the coastal area next to the Mediterranean Sea, they had less famines, and if they did have famines, they were people of the sea, and so they could actually bring in supplies from Egypt and Greece and various places. So it was a wealthier place to be. Also, it was less offensive to the king of Israel. If she had gone to Judah, she probably wouldn't have come back. If she wanted to come back and get her house and land back afterwards, it's probably best to go to the land of the Philistines. That way, the king would be less offended by that. Gehazi. We talked about last week about how the king is carrying on a conversation with a man who we know has leprosy. How is that? Well, more than likely, Gehazi was one of the lepers that saved the city. So the king was probably giving him supplies, food and clothes, and make sure that his needs were met. Wasn't allowed necessarily to come into the city. Wasn't going to give him a hug or anything. Wasn't going to touch him. But was probably meeting his needs and met with him, probably not in the palace, but here probably in a royal garden that was outside the city. But the thing I find interesting is that he's curious. He's curious about the miracles and about the wonderful works of Elisha. So he's listening to this servant tell. Reminds me of another king, King Herod, who wanted to meet Jesus to see the miracles. Elisha and Jesus are often compared. Just like John the Baptist and Elijah, you have Jesus and Elisha. And so both of them here have a curious king about what was going on. The Shunammite woman is now going home. She's going back to Shunem. It's interesting that again, going back to Elisha and Jesus, both of them went to the same hill, the same area. Shunem is on one side of the hill, Naim is on the other side. Elisha works the miracle of raising the Shunammite's son from the dead. Jesus come and raised the widow's son from the dead. And even the people of that day realized that when Jesus did that, it was like the two prophets that came to their very same area to do this miracle. The 40 camels, that was a very generous gift, but not as big as it seems. A camel can hold upwards to 600 pounds of supplies. Well, you don't have 40 times 600 here. It was often when a gift was given, there'd be a big show in the matter. I mean, lots of servants carrying things when actually each servant may only be carrying one or two things. Or 40 camels carrying a lot of supplies, but not definitely laden down heavily. The prophet would take these things because he would it wasn't like he was going to take these for himself. But he, again, was responsible for the school of the prophets. And so he would take these supplies and take them back to the school of the prophets to be used. Hazael was an interesting man. First of all, his name. The king, Ben-Hadad, his father's name was Hazael. Whether it was just a coincidence or if possibly the servant here was named after the former king. it's still Elijah came and anointed Hazael, not this guy, but the other king's father, anointed him king. And now we have this man becoming king. A lot of people are really bothered by how Elijah didn't necessarily embrace truth here when he says, you won't die of this illness, leaving the thought that you're not going to die. But that's not what he said. You're not going to die of this illness. Truth matters, he was going to die, but not of this illness. Of course, he left that part out. Kind of like playing a game of chess here. You don't necessarily tell your opponents everything that you're doing. And so Elisha tells him the truth, but not all the truth. The bringing in the wet cloth, you might think people would hold suspicions of this servant bringing in this wet blanket. No, the king was sick, and he may have had a fever, and it was common in that day to bring in a wet cloth or a blanket or what, and put around the king to help cool him off. And so no one thought anything of it. Even the king would not have thought anything of it. But of course, he used this then to kill the king in a way that would not show any sign of violence. Very smart man. Well, Hazael becomes king, and he does become a very cruel king. And we'll be hearing more about him in future stories. But for now, come back next week when we continue on with more story insights on the story of the week. We'll see you next week.